One of the misconceptions around modernist cooking is this idea of you cook with chemicals. People often tell me, Nathan, don't you cook with chemicals? I said, yes, and with elements too. Of course, everything is made of elements. Everything is a chemical at some level. The exotic sounding ingredients that we use in modernist cooking are really no different in principle than the ingredients that we traditionally use. They just were given fancier names, or they come from different traditions. Let's take an example of making a gel. The traditional way to do this is with a gelatin. That gelatin is usually done these days by boiling pig skins. There is some gelatin made by boiling fish skins. Now, that's a way to make a gelatin. It's a wonderful substance. It's got a set of properties. Meanwhile, in Asia, there's a 1,000-year tradition of using seaweeds. Seaweeds like agar for making a gel. Calling it agar sounds unusual. People say, oh God, I don't want that non-natural thing. But let me tell you, it's just as natural as gelatin or essentially anything else you do. The same thing is true of any of the modernist ingredients, whether they're things like xanthan gum or gellan gum. Those are both made by fermenting bacteria. But then again, yogurt and vinegar are made by fermenting bacteria, and wine is made by fermenting with yeast. There's no particular reason to draw a line and say, oh, fermenting with the bacteria that produce xanthan, that's bad, but somehow fermenting with yeast or with bacteria and other kinds of cooking is good. They're the same kind of thing. A huge number of the gums that we use in cooking are called gums because they come from plant sap. A good example is acacia gum, which is also called gum arabic. It comes from the acacia tree. It's a tree that grows actually all over the world, but particularly prevalent in Africa. That's where they grow it. And you can see the gum exude out of the acacia trees. In fact, there's a bird called the Cory bustard, whose name in Afrikaans and in several traditional African languages means the gum eater, or the sap sucker, because it goes and it likes to eat that specific gum. Locust bean gum sounds quite exotic, except it comes from the seed pods of the locust bean, which is available in your health food store as under the name carob. The seeds contain the carob, but the seed pod contains the gum. There's also some ingredients which are modified. For example, there's things called modified starches. Now, that sounds weird. Why would you modify a starch? But of course, we modify starches in many ways. We grind grain into flour. If we want to have white bread or a white cake, we bleach that flour. There's a whole set of processes around food. And there's one big difference between modernist ingredients and traditional ingredients. Modernist ingredients are provably safe. You can't say that about traditional stuff because of a doctrine that the Food and Drug Administration calls GRAS, generally recognized as safe. When you invent a new food ingredient, or you say, hey, I'm going to have this new kind of refined fermented product called xanthan gum, people who came up with that had to go through lots of hoops to prove it was completely safe. Most other things in our diet, no one's ever done that set of proof for. In fact, there's many people who believe that if ordinary table sugar, sucrose, tried to be approved, it wouldn't be. And that sounds weird, but in fact, once upon a time, sucrose was something you could only get from an apothecary shop. It was no different than any of these other things. Then people figured out ways to make it cheaply and to make it from beets and cane sugar, and it became this incredible phenomena. Since we all love sweet things, it became part of traditional cooking. But of course, it can cause problems with blood sugar and diabetes, and it can cause problems with cavities in your teeth and a whole series of other health issues. It's not clear that if you looked at it today, you'd actually get it approved. So when people tell me, God, all this weird stuff, I'm uncertain about eating it, I say, you actually have your concern misplaced. You should be worried about all the other stuff you're eating that nobody's ever tested.